Imagine watching your home planet starve to death. Not from war, not from plague, but from too much life. Now imagine realizing that the entire universe is next. That's the horror Thanos lived with every single day. His snap, it wasn't cruelty. It was prevention. Today, we're uncovering the cold, terrifying logic behind the Mad Titan's genocide. And the worst part? A part of you might just understand. What if Thanos wasn't born a monster, but made by his world? Consider Titan before its fall, a civilization advanced enough to see its own destruction coming, yet paralyzed when facing it. Thanos watched this unfold as an outsider, marked as different from birth by his deviant syndrome. That genetic divergence made others fear him before he ever gave them reason to, leaving him shunned by his own people. The loneliness of being seen as a freak shaped him far earlier than the snap ever could. Now contrast Titan's fate with our own planet. Earth's population has doubled since 1975, while ecosystems collapse and resources dwindle. Thanos saw this pattern before, a society consuming itself, while leaders ignored warnings. He watched Titan's governing body remain unwilling to face the hard truth, until starvation set in. His extremism didn't emerge from nowhere. It crystallized through years of watching those in power choose comfort over survival. That enforced isolation did something dangerous. It convinced Thanos he alone understood the universe's deepest flaw. Life, left unchecked, consumes itself. His proposed solution, halving all populations, wasn't just about numbers. It reflected his lived experience of being rejected by a society that later died from its own denial. When no one listened to the freak became the only one willing to act. The parallels to real-world crises sharpen when you examine resource depletion. Modern agriculture consumes fresh water 30% faster than nature replenishes it. Fisheries collapse, soil erodes. These aren't abstract concerns. They're Titan's history repeating. Thanos' trauma stemmed from knowing the exact moment his world became unsalvageable. Then watching others dismiss that knowledge. His violence later wasn't just cruelty. It was the fury of being ignored until it was too late. Yet here's the unsettling twist in his psychology. Saving others required becoming what they feared most. Titan's collapse proved societies wouldn't self-correct, so he embraced monstrosity as necessity. His declaration that he'd save life from itself reveals the tragic loop of his thinking. The boy, rejected for being different, became the man who justified genocide by claiming unique understanding. This raises a harder question than whether he was wrong. Could anyone have reached him before he weaponized his pain? The leaders who called him mad created the conditions for his madness. The peers who shunned him guaranteed he'd never develop empathy for those he later killed. Thanos didn't just witness Titan's death. He absorbed its failures as proof that mercy equaled weakness. So when he finally snapped his fingers, it wasn't just about balance. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent screaming into silence. His brutal methods can't be excused, but they can be traced, step by step, back to a lonely child who learned too well how the universe treats outsiders. The terrifying part isn't that he became a villain. It's that every cruelty he committed made perfect sense to someone, forged it collapse. Yet trauma alone doesn't explain the snap's cold mechanics. For that, we need to examine how a wounded idealist convinced himself that genocide was kindness. How do you weigh the lives of half the universe against its survival? Thanos' answer was simple. The needs of the many outweighed the few. But this wasn't just about numbers. It was about logic twisted by trauma. He claimed his solution was mercy, framing genocide as a kindness to prevent worse suffering later. In his mind, the snap wasn't destruction. It was sustainability forced upon a universe that refused to act. At first glance, his argument seems coldly rational. Earth's population doubles roughly every 50 years, while ecosystems degrade and resources shrink. Thanos saw this pattern repeating across the cosmos, just as it had on Titan. His plan treated life like an equation. Halve the variables, and balance is restored. But his math had critical flaws. Modern ecological studies show collapsing populations disrupt food chains and destabilize societies, often triggering new crises. Thanos ignored collateral damage, convinced suffering now justified survival later. This is where the Avengers' resistance makes sense. They didn't just reject his brutality, they rejected his premise. Stark's technology once turned wastelands fertile. Wakanda thrived by innovating, not culling. The team represented alternatives Thanos dismissed because his trauma narrowed his vision. When he said they were unwilling to face the hard truth, he revealed his real blind spot, the belief that only extreme measures could work. History is littered with leaders who framed atrocities as necessary. Colonial powers claimed indigenous genocides, civilized lands. Eugenics movements sought to purify populations for the greater good. Thanos mirrors these patterns, dehumanizing victims into statistics. The cosmic scale doesn't change the core problem. Declaring anyone expendable corrupts the very balance you claim to protect. Could anyone have changed his mind? It's tempting to imagine reasoned debate exposing his errors. But Thanos wasn't looking for solutions. He was enforcing them. When Doctor Strange offered him 14 million futures where they talked.
When Doctor Strange offered him 14 million futures where they talked, none succeeded.
That number isn't just about inevitability. It shows ideology's grip. Rational extremism always justifies itself by dismissing dissent as naivety. The critical flaw in his calculus wasn't the math itself. It was valuing life only in aggregate. Eliminate half of all plants and pollinators collapse. Wipe out half a culture and its knowledge disappears. The snap survivors on Earth spiraled into depression and chaos because people aren't interchangeable. Each life radiates connections his equation erases. Yet, for all his grand designs, Thanos couldn't apply the same detachment to himself. His grief for Gamora proved that even he couldn't fully reduce lives to numbers. That inconsistency haunts his ideology. Why was her loss unacceptable when trillions of others were justified? The answer cracks open something darker. His balance was never truly impersonal, just selfish in a different way. He played God while exempting himself from the costs. Which brings us to the paradox of his choices. A man who claimed to sacrifice everything couldn't bear his own pain. The Titan who saw emotions as weakness was destroyed by them. The Snap's architect couldn't escape the weight of what he'd done, not when the universe fought back, and certainly not when his own heart
betrayed him.
If all lives were equally expendable for balance, why did hers carry more weight? The truth is, Thanos' philosophy was never truly impartial. It is a shield against the pain of caring, one that shattered when forced to pay his own price. What does this say about monsters who love? Thanos believed himself a hero, but heroes don't measure devotion by what they destroy. His grief doesn't redeem him. It exposes the hypocrisy of his cause. He couldn't dehumanize Gamora like he did trillions of others, proving that empathy and tyranny can't coexist. The universe's survivors weren't spared because of mercy. They were spared because they weren't hers. This raises a darker question. Could he have stopped if given the chance? The Soul Stone demands that which you love most, not just any life. Thanos chose to pay, but never considered that love itself might be the solution he ignored. Gamora begged him to see another way, yet his rigidity blinded him. Even in mourning, he couldn't grasp that real balance nurtures life instead of culling it. So where does this leave us? Thanos' pain matters precisely because it changes nothing. A killer who grieves is still a killer. His tears don't make the snap kinder. They reveal the hollowness of any noble cause built on sacrifice unwillingly paid by others. The true tragedy isn't that he felt remorse, but that he used it to justify further cruelty. When vision becomes obsession, even love can't steer you back. Now consider this. If his love for Gamora couldn't change him, what force in the universe could? That answer might explain why some solutions become the problem, and why no ideology survives first contact with human cost. Thanos' story forces us to ask, when does a solution become the problem? Philosopher Hannah Arendt warned of ideological absolutism, when people lose the ability to distinguish between truth and fiction. Thanos crossed that line, believing his vision justified any cost. The real tragedy isn't that he was wrong, it's that he couldn't imagine another way. Like Karl Popper's warning about leaders who evade personal responsibility, Thanos hid behind the greater good, while others suffered. Next time you face an impossible choice, ask, who pays the price for your version of balance? The hardest solutions often demand we question our own certainty first. Balance, born of blood, was never balance at all. Only the silence that follows ruin.